You are now listening to Coach Ham's Chronicles, the show that spills all types of leadership tea for the aspiring leader of colour.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am your girl, Coach Ham, and today we're going to be talking about company culture or lack thereof. So how do you start talking to your employees about race? What makes race that thing that makes everyone so uncomfortable? So once again, if you did not already catch our early intro with my homie Niles, this is Coach Ham Chronicles. This is the show that's going to spill all types of leadership tea that they're not going to tell you in your 9-to-5 job. I am your host, so let's get started. Today's show has been brought to you by Param Intelligence merchandise. You can cop all of your emotional intelligence wear, wine thermoses, kids apparel, travel accessories, whatever you need. Just go to our website, www.parhamintelmerch.com. I promise you, you're going to love the emotional wear. So raise your hand if you've ever heard the following words ever hit your ears from someone else's mouth. You don't look how I expected you to look. What are you mixed with? Wow, you sound really intellectual. Now, for those who are people of indigenous colors, and I'm talking about all the colors, one of the worst things you can ever ask somebody who is not necessarily, let's just say, European vanilla. What are you mixed with? For me, I'm black on black. And yes, really, even though my face looks extremely exotic, because I've heard that multiple times, I'm definitely still black. And the face is no longer a pleasant nor amused face when you ask us that, nor is it really appropriate, even in the workplace, to say these words. So if you've never actually heard of it because you've been so phased or just lived in a whimsical thought process, let me be really clear. You can't ask people of color, what are they mixed with? Your hair, can I touch it? No, we're not lambs. We're not in a petting zoo. Here are just some small things I want you to keep in mind. And keep in mind, for those who are having this type of upbringing, it gives me a very unique ability. And I mean, for the emotional intelligence side of the house, being black, it brings me closer to having a variety of perspectives, not just because of my skin tone, but also my thought process, how I see the world, how I view certain things, especially when it comes to leadership and development, or better yet, that lack thereof. I've learned that how people see the world won't always be subsequent to certain names that start ringing true. So your Ahmaud Arbery's, your Breonna Taylor's, George Floyd's, your Tony McDade's. These become a trigger for a lot of individuals, and the much needed help in the long overdue national conversation about policing, racism, and white supremacy needs to be talked about. And yes, there's always a time and a place for everything. And a lot of people will honestly say, hey, Ham, here's a problem with this type of conversation. It makes people uncomfortable. I'm aware of that. And sometimes it's good to be uncomfortable. And even though we're still tapping into those same emotional intelligence survival toolkits, for those who are minorities, you have to see past these generations of backdrops and circumstances, because this is where the mindset becomes vastly different from those who've lived the status quo for the last 400 to 500 years. Now, there's a sense of belonging that comes to these groups of people, because not only does it benefit the greater community, but it also improves their motivation, their health, their engagement with the world, and also their general well-being. Racism and discrimination do exactly the opposite. So when you start looking at emotional intelligence, it seems that the professional development using those trigger words are the nice to haves. And I'm talking about BC, before COVID. Now, for my minorities, using EQ has been an integral part of maintaining, bonding, and developing company culture. And I know it's extremely hard to do so when you live in a culture that doesn't necessarily value you or see you as human. So here's a couple of things that's going to hit your humanistic approach. So for the skills that you really need to tout and make sure that you have under your belt are going to be key to your modern business leadership development, as well as a leadership model. You're going to have to be part of the Black People Survival Strategy 101. And I know you're like, Coach Ham, what the heck is that? I'll explain in a second. So for those African Americans and Latinas and pretty much anyone from the diaspora, they've lived in a country that has engulfed and enveloped enslavement, and people's identities were so tightly connected to the productivity metrics that it was discounted from their own humanity. It is society that equates of being a good worker from being a good person. So a recent study, because we always talk about the numbers, from Northwestern, they found that stress of racial discrimination in the workplace had negatively impacted those who were in entry-level and mid-level management over 75% of the time. Now, for these individuals, it's been reported that they felt separated, excluded, which then ultimately impacted their ability to focus in the boardroom. Production levels went down. There was a sense of disdain, discomfort, and just overall discourse. So for my bosses, my CEOs, my C-suiters, and even my mid-level managers, with the recent events of these murders and policing and just everything that's going on in the world, start having these difficult conversations. Yes, and I mean have the conversation. Why do we need to consistently run from it? Of course, any communication that you initiate must be tailored to the individual. I wouldn't say that you just randomly walk up to an individual of color to say, hey, what about that shooting? No, I'm not saying do that. But being emotionally intelligent includes recognizing that individuals respond differently to a various amount of styles and tactics. So you're going to have to be extremely smart and in tune with who you're talking to. How does this conversation resonate for them? What does it mean when you start bringing up really uncomfortable things? So I'm going to break down 2 to 3 big picture items that will help you focus and start to refine and tune your communication style for when you start to have really uncomfortable conversations. So get your pen, your paper out, and let's get started. And we're back. So emotional literacy. This is one of the main skills in knowing yourself. This is the first pursuit of figuring out exactly what makes you tick. How are you affected by certain things in the world, whether it is political, socioeconomical, racial, and even spiritual means? This means being able to have an identity that's not more than just your name, but it will interpret your emotions. Did you know there's about 3,000 words in the English language that describes how you feel? And yet, sadly, most of us only use 12. Angry, sad, frustrated. So remember that when you start having a discussion, strong feelings will start to appear. And yet, you're going to have to learn how to deal with them. Start attaching that exact vocabulary to the feeling and the situation or conversation that you're starting to have. So it also depends on what the conversation is. You may also be in the wrong. So also prepare for accountability. If you didn't hear our last podcast, we started talking about accountability and what that looks like. You don't always have to be right, especially in topics that you're not really sure of and you're honestly not truly aware of how it impacts other groups of people. So having a firm sense of who you are outside of the stereotypical white gaze is going to be critical for you to increase within your emotional intelligence. So number 2, having a consequential thought process. This means evaluating the cost and benefit of your choices and your actions. Remember, if you are not a minority, you can't fully understand what it's like to be Black, Asian, Latina, LGBTQ+, pretty much the entire rainbow coalition of people. And vice versa. We also can't understand what it means to be a white male, white female, because let's be honest, white women are also a minority now. I will tell you, a girlfriend of mine recently told me that, and I almost looked at her with this glazed look like I just ate 12 Krispy Kreme donuts. I was shocked because I was like, I'm sorry, you white women are still winning in this world compared to us, but I'll let you have it. So in the context of how we use emotional intelligence to discuss racism and discrimination, applying this consequential thought means that you'll be able to think proactively and thoughtfully about how you respond to certain things. It means being able to entail your thoughts to how you say certain things. You start to pause before making a choice. And this pause is going to be key to how you move and react to behavior. Also, I need you to evaluate the emotional component to the situation. So here's a perfect example. The Derek Chauvin trial that just ended. The entire world, not just the states, the world was on edge watching this trial unfold because it wasn't just Derek Chauvin. We were also talking about George Floyd's history, trying to find ways to poke holes in this entire case to make sure that it was clearly known that he wasn't in the wrong. And can you imagine having those conversations at work, knowing that it is completely false, knowing that what right is right and what's wrong is wrong? And sometimes you have to be honest with yourself that these are those conversations that you want to take a tactical pause and be really mindful of how things are coming off. The most important skill for each of us to learn is that as we arrive to our own decisions, you can only do so much for others. In order for a person to improve, we all have to be able to improve and understand what this individual is talking about. How does it relate to them, their community? There's a lot of research that shows when you're able to process and write down an experience, you're able to have a bit more distance from it. You can find the redemptive perspective in it. You can process the actual feelings that are there. So I'll give you that challenge. Take certain instances, experiences, situations, write them down, and then review it. Look at everything from the perspective of a whole of person approach. Instead of positioning this adverse moment as a disempowerment or even taking the fatalistic approach, you can start reframing how you see the world. Now, granted, this is sometimes horrible, but yet there is a way for us to get through it. We have to acknowledge that certain things that we live for and we do is a lot harder than just talking about it. And once we've processed and sat with these feelings, create counter narratives that showcase your identity and your value. That is how you're able to take a consequential thinking approach and turn it into a whole of person approach. And last but not least, how do we increase our empathy? Now, when we start to feel enraged, lonely, ashamed, pissed off, it may become difficult to start thinking about how others might feel. And I get it, we're human. We all make mistakes. But empathy is the second and third step to understand one another, how we're being perceived, how we're supposed to be in this world. And it also is a key to giving ourselves grace. None of us have control over how others comment or what they can say, but we can have control over how we feel. We can learn from those reactions. We can relate to them similarly, but yet having the experience of certain past events, we're able to adjust for the future. So it goes back to having that tactical pause. If everyone was able to use their emotional intelligence, maybe there wouldn't be any more new names added to the obituaries. There won't be the Breonna Taylors, the Trayvon Martins, the George Floyds. Our ability to produce isn't what defines us. This allows us to make space for these three items I just discussed. It can help us connect to our identities and separate from the labor, affirming that we are not just our outbox, but it gives us compassion and space so we can process our exact feelings. And learning from them is what we're all about. Until next time, peace.